Everyone, welcome to another wonderful comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am delighted to be talking with author, creator, Jen Bateman. Jen, thank you for jumping in, joining, and talking with me for a few minutes.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's been a while since I've done an interview, so
Oh,
forgive me if
wonderful.
I'm a little rusty.
No, no, you're already doing so well. The background is wonderful, enjoying the art, enjoying the visuals, and I appreciate the artistic sensibility that you have, and I also please see, I'll edit that. Appreciate the advocacy that you do as well.
Well, thank you. And what is it they say? Showing up is half the battle,
That's right. Yeah,
or part of
absolutely.
it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And you're a busy person these days. You have multiple projects going on.
Oh boy. Yeah, I have a full-time day job. I have a relationship which, requires time.
Hmm.
I have my own personal projects that I've been getting back to, and I'm also the vice president and creative director for the Minnesota Comic Book Association. And that alone is probably taken up, I quit counting, around 500 hours, but probably about 700 hours of volunteer time in the
Wow.
last year, getting that going again. So I pretty much hit the ground running every morning and collapse at the end of the day. So
Yeah. 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 Well, it's great work that you do, and I'm curious about we both love this medium of comics, so I'm curious about how you connected with comics and decided that it was the space that you wanted to create in.
well, unlike a lot of my colleagues, I've never really been into comic books, with the exception of a few indie titles. But I grew up, my dad had a newspaper subscription, and, I'd come home from school and have a bowl of Cheerios and go straight to the comics section.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what most of my exposure to comics was growing up. And so you see that in my work is more of a kind of newspaper strip style format versus like a traditional graphic novel or comic book. Um, I'm late diagnosed autistic. I figured out around 40. And I think, especially with the autobiographical project I'm working on now, it kind of came to me that my art style in combination with eventually comics became a way for me to communicate very complex ideas and emotions and experiences through pictures
Mhm.
that, even neurotypical people don't always have the vocabulary to express these things. But I found that, especially when I started doing more personal, kind of more sometimes darker, but that kind of intense work, that it enabled me to connect with my audience in a way that I couldn't with just writing alone or like a conversation.
Mhm.
Um, some, I have control issues. Like I'm not always aware of what expression I'm making. I might look super angry, but inside I'm like, yeah, today's great. Like my face doesn't always match what's going on inside. But with a picture, when I'm looking at it, when I'm drawing it, I can make it convey exactly what I want the other person to see so that I can kind of illustrate my inner world in a way that's not always reflected by, the meat space version of me walking around doing things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the use of the visual that way to just capture, it's so beautiful, and there's such a layer to it as well. So many layers to it, really.
I think that's probably true for all artists and kind of the medium in general, but I think there's an extra layer of helpfulness for someone like me who traditionally has had difficulty connecting with people and always felt kind of other, like I'm watching the world from the outside. So for neurodiverse people, for autistic people, I think that it is extra helpful to be able to communicate in a way that um, is more universal.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love it when elements of an author's life make their way into work. And when I've really enjoyed memoir comics and the attention that they've gotten in the past 15, 20 years or so. Curious about what that process was like for you to dig in, explore your story that way, and what kind of inspired that.
Well, my old work, which I've kind of just separated myself from for a lot of reasons that would take an entire interview just to explain that. I had started the thought of doing a more general memoir, maybe losing track of time, 5 to 8 years ago now.
Hmm.
And for me, sometimes there's a very long kind of gestational period for some of my projects. Like I might get an idea, but I'm not quite sure about it. And so it kind of just sits on the back burner. But then I always say, like, when this project is ready, like it's like, here I am, okay, let's do this now. And so it was kind of an idea, but I couldn't get it going. I couldn't figure out what was missing. And then when I figured out I'm autistic and started learning about autism and becoming able to navigate the world better, in particular, like you understand your sensory issues. So, you're like, oh, I'm not really like I don't dislike people, but I'm in a crowded environment. What's actually happening is that I'm overstimulated, and until I understood what was happening, you realize like, hey, it's not the people. I just need to like leave this environment for a while and you know get back to baseline, and it's fine. You're
Hmm.
not you're understanding what's going on. And it's very common. This isn't a thing that's exclusive to me by any means, but it's very, very common for late diagnosed autistic people to kind of go through this, almost like you hear like a near death experience where you have the full life evaluation.
Hmm. Hmm.
They go through that process, and I certainly did, where it's like I'm going back in my memory, and as I've resolved traumas, my memory has become clearer, and I've been able to remember things that were kind of locked away. I went through a process where I talked to all these people from my past, and kind of just reevaluated my whole life from the beginning. And then eventually, the project that had kind of been on the back burner became the one that I'm preparing to launch now. So, kind of the seed of what I wanted to do was there, but I feel like maybe I couldn't move forward on it because the piece I was missing was that actually I'm autistic and this is how my brain works. And this is the answer to all these questions that I've been struggling with for 40 years. Like, why am I like this? Why is my life like this? Why are my relationships like this? And it wasn't until I had that piece of information that I could move forward. And so I hope I haven't gone to drift from
Hmm.
the original question. But that's how that came about. And so I started digging around for old documents. I started doing research on files. I interviewed people from my past and just started writing everything down, collecting everything, and then created like a rough timeline. Then I broke it down into smaller periods of time, and then I broke those down smaller yet, so that other than up to the stuff that's been happening like the last few couple of years, 2 3 years, there's like rough outline for this entire project. But the further you get back to the work I'm doing now, the more tightly it's scripted.
Wow. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope I answered the question. I
You
forgot what the
did.
question.
Yeah. It sounds like it was quite a process and a personal process as well.
It's been very I wouldn't say easy, because a lot of it's involved living through kind of everything again. But in addition to kind of understanding some of the stuff that's happened to me in the process of understanding myself better, I've come to understand other people better. And so I've been able to also let go of a lot of stuff that maybe I had been hanging on to before, heavy things or bad feelings, because, I can have compassion for myself, but I can also have more compassion for other people,
Yeah.
even people that have hurt me, carrying that stuff, it just eats away at you, in the long run. It's not good to carry those things. And so um it's almost like with every page, I'm healing myself, putting this stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's been a healing process. What do you hope readers notice? What do you hope readers take away as they engage with it?
I think my first goal was to help neurotypical people, who have a very hard time understanding the life experience of someone whose brain works differently. And unfortunately, the reverse isn't so, because as an autistic person, even if you don't know what your diagnosis is, you still have this kind of inherent understanding. There's something different about me. Like when I say things, people don't understand what I'm trying to say. Um, but neurotypical people in general, this isn't, nothing I say is universally true for everybody. I'm speaking in generalities, but neurotypical people tend to default assume everyone in the world thinks like they do.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know the experience or recognize, the, please forgive, there's a lot of dispute about different terminology, but the autistic person with cognitive um, impairments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, the nonverbal child, um, the one who is, and this is a bad term, but low functioning, everyone recognizes that. But in terms of people who have what they used to call Asperger's, where you don't have these impairments, and in some cases you can be very intelligent, um, people will just come at you and say, "Oh, you're smart, you can do things, you have a job. Uh, what's wrong with you? Why are you like this? Why can't you just get along? Why are you rude? Why are And so going back to like my previous example where, I'm in a room and I'm in a comic book convention and there's people talking around me and there's noise and there's someone dropping things on the floor. It's loud. I may start to look angry and somebody's talking to me, and eventually I'm like, I have to go now. And I turn around and leave. And that person's like, "What's wrong with you? What a jerk, how
Mm-hmm.
rude." And it's like, now I have the language to say, "I'm sorry. This environment's really overwhelming for me right now. I need to step away. Don't take it personally." But before I knew that, it was just like, wow, Jen's such a jerk. Look at that, doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
time for me. And so I think my first goal, like my most conscious goal in doing this work, was to use the graphic novel format to help put a neurotypical person in my shoes and understand how the world looks to me and sounds to me as I'm trying to navigate my life, and becoming an adult. Um, on a deeper level, as somebody whose life has pretty much been like nonstop, minor or major traumas, society doesn't produce any non-traumatized autistic people, is what they say. Um, but for a lot of reasons, my life has been pretty much struggle in one form or another. And a lot of that struggle didn't have to happen if the other people in my life could see things from my point of view. or
Hmm.
understand how what they were doing was affecting me. And so I I don't think it's helpful for the environment and the way things are right now. People get me too'd or whatever, and everybody dog piles, or just wants to cast somebody out. And in some cases, things are so heinous that that's appropriate, but in a lot of cases, it's not.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, one of the other things I wanted to do was to try to illustrate the the things that happened to me and how I was being traumatized and how these things were affecting me. And over the longer arc of the story, how some of these things that happened very early in my life had like these knock-on effects much later. But I hope that maybe some people who have maybe engaged in abusive behaviors in the past, or had problematic relationships, or I hope that maybe some people could see themselves in some of the actions that others have done that hurt me, but
Hmm.
from a non-judgmental perspective. Like, I'm not telling you you're a bad person. I'm saying that a lot of the people that hurt me, I always say they don't sit there and go, ha ha, I'm going to be a bad person. Nobody does that. Well, a few people do, but mostly nobody does that.
Hmm.
It comes from ignorance, right? So, I don't want to demonize anybody. I don't want somebody to say, gosh, this person's a terrible person. I want the person that did something wrong to maybe see some of their behavior and the stuff that I'm illustrating, and say, and have maybe a moment of clarity or recognition, and say, I didn't realize how what I was doing was affecting the other person,
Yeah.
and maybe just change their behavior. Like, I wasn't aware. Hello, puppy. I wasn't aware of the kind of rise of the AI when I first started this project. But it feels like now more than ever, with social media, with everything just being sound bites, with everything feels very disconnected and broken to me. And it feels like people have forgotten on a large scale, like how to communicate and connect with each other. And being autistic, I literally just said, there's a point that's not in the book yet. This is very recent, but I had an early midlife crisis at 24 in 2014, and I was like, "What is going on?" And I literally said, "I'm gonna learn how to be a person. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna figure it out." And maybe even for neurotypical people who've kind of lost touch with themselves, or maybe were never too connected with who they really are in the first place, that maybe through illustrating my own, path to figuring this out, that it might help them get there too, or at least give them the spark and the initiative to say, hey, this is something I should explore for myself. And maybe in the long run, I can help at least some people learn how to connect again, and communicate again, and be part of a community, and this interconnectedness that we seem to have lost. And I'm very concerned that with all the AI, especially the arts and the writing, and computers regurgitating artistic creative material, I'm really worried that we're just losing touch with what makes us human. And so this has felt a little more urgent, the further along I've gotten.
So I love what you were saying there about having the language for the way that you're feeling and that just need to communicate. and to have those words to share with other people. I'm curious about you said that it's launching soon, so I'm curious about where people can go to find out more and uh, what they might do to take next steps to engage with you creatively.
So right now, prior to the interview, I had provided you with it's 117 pages of rough draft.
Hmm.
Those are it goes from script to rough draft, and then the final project is digital. Those are available to read right now on my Patreon. Um, it's the minimum dollar a month to subscribe to get past the paywall. I kind of just let people pay what they want, but there's not really much in the way of tiers. I'm working on the finished comics now. So those will be launching as a web comic on September 2nd. And that will be
Awesome.
on basically all of my social media. Um, the new comics, the finished comics, will be posted to my Patreon account as they're finished. So if you subscribe, you can read those now as they're being finished, but they will be available free to everybody September 2nd. Um, Book wise, my longer term goal is to do like a rough, they're broken up at spots where the story transitions, but roughly a 50-page kind of floppy paperback book probably once a year. But the overarching goal is to do 3 hardcover volumes.
Mm,
And so those would be about every 4 to 5 years, and those will have extra material in them, such as like actual photos and mementos or old report cards or things from the period of my life, kind of that the comic is at that point. So they'll kind of look like scrapbook pages in there, and those will be extra for the printed volumes. I don't put my comics behind a paywall, other than being able to read them early. I
mhm,
never have. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have a day job that for the most part covers all of my normal expenses. And then my Patreon mostly covers like my web hosting and supplies and equipment so it's kind of my Patreon covers the costs of making the comics except for time. Of course, I appreciate all of the support I can get. A
mhm,
lot of the support that I get right now is also going to help the MNCBA, because all the most active volunteers have poured a lot of their own personal funds into getting the convention going again. But this isn't about money for me, which is why it will be released as a 1 page a week web comic once it launches. So right now I'm building up the buffer of material so that I have at least 3 or 4 months worth of comics completed.
mm,
Because once I start updating, I don't want any interruptions. It's just going to be once a week. Here's your comic, even if it's a holiday, whatever. It's going to stay on schedule. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I got to know what happens next, then you can subscribe to my Patreon and read
mhm,
about 2 to 3 months ahead or the drafts further. But for me, I'm not anti-commerce, but you know, everything feels so paradoxically devalued to me when it's everything is money. Everybody wants to sell you something.
mhm,
Um, I became kind of drifted into secular Buddhism over the past 2 years, and I'm just 2 years more than that now. But I'm just not a materialistic person. It's not about money for me. It's about getting the message out there. It's about rebuilding community. It's about helping people cultivate more understanding, um, and just putting together all these things that it feels like we're losing, and now almost trying to build a firewall, where somebody who maybe doesn't know, like, you come to my page, you look at my work, I will promise you I do not use generative AI. Everything you see is 100% human created work by an imperfect human being having imperfect human experiences. It's authentic.
mhm.
And I think that's what the world needs right now is more authenticity. And the kids call it cringe, that it's become so unfashionable to be sincere. It's like, well, here I am. I'm gonna make it cringe. I'm gonna make it cringe for everybody, and we can have difficult conversations and wrestle with difficult feelings, and maybe kind of learn how to connect with each other again.
Love that. I love the vision, and I will be sure to share the link to the Patreon. And yeah, I appreciate a lot about what you said there, and that need for authenticity is just it can't be overstated.
Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Glad to have you back anytime. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to share for listeners before we close out?
Uh, no, I feel like I've said a lot already, so maybe it's time for some lunch.
All right, all right. Lunch would be great. Hope it's a good lunch, and thank you so much, Jen. Truly glad to have you back anytime.
Thank you.